Tools do more than just make the work happen. They carry fingerprints, scars, and stories from every project they survived. Welcome to Weld, where each week we explore different pathways in the welding industry. I'm your host, Beau Wigington, and this week we're heading up to East Durham to step inside the world of Jimmy DiResta. From drill presses and Bridgeports to lathes, power hammers, and the tool Jimmy keeps coming back to, the bandsaw. We dive in right now.
This place is a little disorganized.
It's okay.
We just had a big job and everything gets pushed out of the way. But I think this is a Cincinnati. We were not able to find branding on it, but a couple people who watched the video said it's probably a Cincinnati. And this was given to me by a fan, but the story is he was a real estate guy. He's not even a maker. He just loves watching the videos. And he blindly bid on a piece of property at a real estate auction in some county in Massachusetts. And he won this piece of property. It was an old barn from the early 1800s. And somebody famous, I wish I could remember, I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
It's Matthew McConaughey.
A famous inventor from the Revolutionary War era. This was his barn. And the guy was pivotal in inventing some Industrial Revolution stuff, I don't know. Anyway, it was his barn in the colonial times. And this doesn't go back as far as his original presence at the place, but that's where this was. This was in part of an old machine shop in this guy's barn. The place was dilapidated. They bought it sight unseen, but they were getting ready to restore it. And to restore it, they had to get rid of all the machines that were in there. And some of them were completely beyond repair, just rusted and parts broken off because the place was abandoned. Kids are in there fiddling around. This was complete. It was sitting there, and he sent me a picture, but I thought it was this big. I didn't. Yeah. So I show up in my pickup truck, my little Chevy 1500, and I was with my cousin who was visiting from Florida on vacation, and we had maybe a roll of wrenches and a vice grip.
Oh, man.
And I didn't really know what to think about it. So he goes, come. He goes, there's a couple machines here. There's a drill press you might like. And so he goes, what do you think? I go, what do I think? I go, I can't take this. He goes, I feel bad. He goes, we're getting skid steers here and stuff this week. He goes, it's going to get thrown in a dumpster. He goes, it's not. He goes, I wish you could save it.
Yeah. And
so I looked at my cousin John. I go, what do you think? He goes, we could at least try and take it apart. And so with a couple of wrenches and a pair of vice grips, me and John took this whole thing apart.
Dang.
Piece by piece, broke it apart, took pictures while we did it. It's probably in the video. We took it apart, threw it in the back of my pickup truck, and I got it back here to East Durham. This was in 2018, because it was right around the same time I built that canoe. So it was around 2018. So I got it back here, and I put it on pallets. I broke it down, and I put it on 2 or 3 pallets, all the big parts, the base, everything. And I was like, that's never getting put back together. And it sat out in the rain, which wasn't in good shape to begin with. It sat out in the rain for over 2 years. And then Rob, who works for me, Rob Rojas, started working for me. And he said, the first thing he's like, what do you want me to do? I was like, I don't know, pick a project. And he looked at me and he goes, how about that drill press out there? Because I had done stories on it, so he had seen it in the Instagram. And I go, let's go it. And he just started cleaning off and had brush painted all over it. It was several layers of paint. This looks like a disaster now. It looks like it needs to be restored now, but it's really only because it just needs to be dusted and oiled. But we cleaned it completely. Rob cleaned every part off. It was missing some screws. We machined some screws for some of the parts. This was broken up here. One of these gears was broken. I forget which one it was. One of these gears was broken. I ended up fixing the gear, and it was broken right in half. But this would have been run on a belt drive in an original shop. And it was set up that way. It never had a motor mount on it. Because when it was abandoned, it was still a line shaft shop. Yeah. That's how long it's been sitting there, before electric. And so I ended up putting the motor mount on it. This is a floor sander from Home Depot.
Oh, nice.
That's what the motor is from. My buddy fell out the back door of Home Depot. Let me turn it on.
All right, let's hear it rip.
And come on, baby. It's not so practical.
Yeah.
But it is good for drilling long, deep holes. If I had to do the leg of the table or something.
Yeah.
And it's got a long throw, and it's got this power feed. That's feeding, turning that. So that's actually drilling down.
That's cool.
And you can certainly change the speed on everything too. You can slow it down, speed it up.
And it's all belts. Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing I see on like the old machines is belts were king, you know? It's like a lot more belts than just like brushes and magnets.
Let's see.
How did you, like, to build this motor on it, like, and put the motor on it, did you just fabricate this whole setup?
This whole setup is just fabricated and all welded. It's just one arm holding the motor in place.
So if someone out there had a machine that didn't have a motor, you just set up this pulley system, like, to connect in, or?
No, well, this, in all reality, the line shaft, the belt shaft would have gone up to the air right from these two belts. This is your drive belt, and that's your idler belt. You see how that? So to shut the thing off in a line shaft building, you would use this lever here, and that lever would push that to the idler, which doesn't do anything, it just spins. So the whole line shaft is going down the whole room, it never stops, and you're just literally tapping into that motion with this, and this is your on-off switch, basically.
That's a big
But since we have electric and we have on-off switch, I left it on there just because it looks cool.
Yeah.
But now it should go slower.
Oh, because you went to a different pulley?
Yeah, I moved it over to the other pulley. So if I needed a long, slow hole, like if you're drilling like an engine block or something, you see how long and slow and deep that's going.
Yeah.
You just set it up and I'll
Walk
make
away.
tea and come back. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a super cool one.
I could show you. You want to see another really cool one?
I would love to. I would love to see all the cool toys.
All right, we'll go out. Let's go out to the blacksmith shop. I'll show you something really cool.
Okay.
We'll take the long walk.
Taking the long walk. This is cool, man. You said you made that canoe?
Yeah, I built that canoe.
That's crazy. How did, like...
That's a bandsaw was given me by a fan. They just gave it to me. It didn't need to be restored.
Oh, wow. Never a dull moment here on the Weld.com podcast, especially at Jimmy's place.
So this is my leather shop. This is a horse barn. This is going to be the hayloft for the horse barn, but I turned it into my leather shop.
That's cool. This is beautiful. Look at all these bags.
Quiet on the set. So this is the leather bags that I make. I came up with this sort of unisex style, man, woman, and trying to make a buck making leather stuff. So this was going to be the hayloft for the horse barn downstairs. Since I probably won't ever have horses, I turned this into my leather shop. These bags I designed so that they're all cut out of one piece of leather and they finger joint together.
That's cool.
This is like the little purse for the women. And then those are just like tool bags, or like I said, I've sold them to men and women for tools or for accessories. So this is 10 ounce. This is 10 ounce leather that I use to make the leather bags out of. All those bags are made out of 10 ounce bridle leather. And then I got anvils and vice stands everywhere. You never have too many vice stands.
Where do you come across anvils?
Because I'm like a visible person in the world. People call me all like, "You want this old vice?" I'm like, "You want this old anvil?" I'm like, "Okay." Or sometimes it's for sale. Like a lot of times I'll be like, "You want this anvil? It's $500." I'm like, "I got 30. I don't need another one." They're like, "All right." And as I'm leaving, they're like, "You want it for 200?" I'm like, "I'll take it for 200."
Yeah, I'll take it for that. That's a good price on an anvil.
I'll show you my anvil collection. We'll go there next.
Let's do it. I'm excited. So which one's your favorite anvil, though?
I like this because it's crisp and clean. This is a German anvil. I got this from my buddy Andrew, Blacksmith Tools. And then this is a French anvil I got from Chris Cash, which I like a lot too.
So the difference in the two anvils for people like us that aren't big anvil people, what's the difference between the two?
The reason I like him personally is that this has a really small point here and here. So these are really small points that I often get inside if I'm like making a curl on something. Mm-hmm. And then this has a nice sharp edge. You could tell anvils a lot of times have a hard plate at the top. Like this, for instance, has its own hard plate that's broken half off. This is somebody that didn't know any better. They said, oh, you got this specialty anvil with this weird specialty top. And I looked at it 1 second. I said, this specialty top is broken off. This is a regular anvil, and the hard face is broken off. That's what happens. It just got delaminated, and it breaks off. And so whoever owned it was like, don't matter. And so I have in the past cut this off completely and then put a new hard face on. But a small anvil that's at my other shop, none of these. So let me show you this here. This is the specialty thing.
Oh.
Yeah, so this This is made, it says right on here, made in 1890, June 10th. Does that say 1890? I don't have my glasses
Yeah,
on.
1890.
Yeah, this is a DuPont power hammer. And Fairbanks, a DuPont, either one, the names are sort of interchangeable, depends on where and when. And this, I got on Facebook, or I got this on Craigslist before Facebook Market started, and paid $3,000 for it. But when I bought it, it was just this frame, and all these parts were in a box.
Oh, man.
This was in a box. Somebody started to restore it like 25 years ago and then just gave up, and it just sat in the corner of this guy's shop. And so it wasn't even his. He's like, my buddy brought it here years ago, never did anything, now I want it out of here. So I asked him to get rid of it, and so he put it on Craigslist. So I bought it, and I had to machine all these joints. They were all oblong from just being used 100 years ago. So every joint here is milled out, and there's a bronze sleeve put in it, hard bronze sleeve put in it, and then all these pins to fit inside it. So every one of these holes was milled out wider with a bronze sleeve. This. So that for me was a real education in machining. I hadn't really done that up till then.
As far as like, so when restoring all this kind of stuff, say someone's never restored something before, what kind of grease? Like that's probably the first thing
I just
would
use
ask.
motor oil. I
Motor
just use car motor oil. Or I just get like all-purpose grease. You know, there's somebody probably punching their computer right now hearing me say that, but
There's like, come on, man.
my motto is any oil is better than no oil.
Yeah.
You know, when guys are going, oh, I can't put oil in it but I need to use it. I'm like, any oil is better than no oil. That's my theory. Nothing in my life has ever seized.
What's your method of getting bolts out?
Torch.
Torch it.
Just oxyacetylene every time. For instance, the Cadillac, the Woody that's parked over there, that's something I made this year. We got that car last September, and the engine was totally frozen, solid. We couldn't turn it, nothing turned. And the way I was trying to turn it was the drive shaft was broken. So the drive shaft was connected and still exposed in the back of the car. I just got a big monkey wrench, and I just tried to turn the drive shaft while it was in gear. I figured it would turn the motor, and nothing was moving. And I was trying kerosene and, you know, all kinds of stuff down the heads. We took the heads completely off, and I saw some guy online. He just goes, you want to get your engine block unfrozen? He goes, just heat it up. So I put a rosebud on the oxyacetylene. I dragged it over to where the car was. I heated the engine up to the point where flames were shooting out of all the open ports because the heads are off, because all the oil was on fire now. I mean, engines get 200, 300 degrees, right? So I heated it all up, and I went to the back of the drive shaft, jiggled the drive shaft, and then all of a sudden it moved.
Dang.
And I couldn't see, I was alone, so I set up a GoPro, and I pulled it a couple, and then I went to the GoPro, and it looked like all the cylinders were moving. So now I know I don't have a broken piston shaft or a drive shaft. Everything was moving.
Little
So
love and heat.
just the heat got it going.
That's awesome.
Especially when you get like an old nut or anything like that, just let it cool off, heat it again, let it cool off, and then usually it comes right off.
That's awesome.
It's like the only way. Penetrating oil, I don't think does anything. When you got a rusted nut. So a couple of years ago, I bought this power hammer from Andrew Alexander, Blacksmith Tools, and it was pretty much a disaster. It came on a pallet. It actually came on that pallet right there. But during Maker Camp 2 years ago, it was sitting at the shop. It was pouring rain out.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those couple
We
days?
were there.
Yeah.
We were there.
We were all at my shop restoring this during Maker Camp.
Oh, dang.
There was like 7 guys on it. They were like, everybody was, give me this, give me that. They took it completely
I
apart.
remember that.
And put it all back. So this was the one.
This is the one.
Yeah, this thing.
Dang.
A 25 pounder.
25 pounds?
25 pounder, that's how big the head is. So it's a little.
Hey, Jimmy, before we go,
Yeah.
tell me about this one.
This was an early video. This is just a little leg vise I got at the flea market, and it was missing its spring. You know, usually it would be a leaf spring. So I had this I-beam, and I had this big piece of steel puck that I get from this. It's like a drop that I get from this place that sells all these drops, and they're by the pound. They sell a bunch of drops by the pound. So I bought this big puck from them, and I bought this I-beam from them, and this plate, which I cut some stuff out of, but it was still big enough to be a stand. So I welded this all together, and just to piss off the blacksmith trolls, I put regular spring in there instead of putting back a leaf spring, just for fun. And this was a YouTube video I did years ago, just putting this vice stand together. This is when you could actually do like fun, simple stuff and still get 500,000 views.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
Now you got to blow up a Ferrari to get those kind of views.
Don't we know it?
Don't we know it?
You want to see something in here? Come look in here.
Yeah.
So when I first got this place, when I first bought this house, this was a garage full of furniture. So I got all the furniture out and I made it into my only shop. So this was the only shop I had up here, and bought the house in '04. So this was the only shop I had for a while. So as I got bigger machines like the Bridgeport, this was given to me by a friend. I wasn't even on YouTube or anything at the time. And then I bought this lathe. I bought this lathe on Craigslist at the time.
That's a ranch, right?
You need one of those?
Yeah.
So this is a 1944. So it was not, I can't honestly say it was in the war effort. It was in the war era. 16 swing, 8-foot bed.
Dang.
In my shop where we just walked through, where the drill press is, I have a 16 swing, 10-foot bed that I got from a machine exchange guy for $2,000. I paid $2,000 for this. That one was in perfect shape. That one inside the other shop, the green one, is a 1967. This is a 1944. But they're basically the same machine.
What do you use in the lathes for the most? Like,
The last thing I used this for was I did a long tapered leg for a guy. You know, in the old days, they had buildings that had machine shops in them to fix whatever was wrong in the building.
interesting.
No one does that anymore. So that green lathe over there, my 10-foot bridge, my 10-foot South Bend is from Columbia University's machine shop, and the Bridgeport mill over there. They're both very low hours, clean, because they were in building machine shops where nobody touches them.
I had no idea that was even a thing.
Yeah, like the old buildings, like, you know, around Boston and New York, we have this big building that has steam fittings and such. The building maintenance guys would have a machine shop to fix stuff. But now you just hire a specialist to come in and do it.
Or just buy a new one.
Yeah, or just buy a new building.
You know? Buy a new building with a machine shop.
I used to have a Tormach here, but I gave it to Dave, DTB, so he could make guns on it.
Oh,
Because I wasn't using it. Who is that? Put the gun down. If you want to hear a story on the lathe, we can go over there and talk about my old lathe.
I would love to.
This is what I made the porch poles on. The porch poles are trees that fell down in the yard, and this is the cut mill pieces like that were left over. I trimmed them all to the correct size. Some of them are long, some of them are short. But these were pine trees that blew down last winter in the backyard.
Dang.
And they had been standing dead, so the wood was really dry by the time they fell down. It's a little crowded back here, but this is a 12-foot long lathe. It's a 12-foot long pattern maker's lathe. But the interesting story with this lathe is I bought it from a guy on Facebook Market who won it at an auction. When this guy won it at an auction, it came in two pieces, this head and the lathe bed. And you see this bundle right here? There's about 15 wires in that bundle. And to take this off so they could move it, they cut the pack of wires. They're all black wires from the turn of the century, rubber-coated black wires. They just literally went in there with a pair of end cutters and just snipped through all 15, 18 wires. So when I got it, I had this with a bunch of dead wires that way and the bottom with a bunch of dead wires that way. And they were all black. And so I had to go in there with a microscope and look and see what the shape of the cut was and compare it by a process of elimination to the shape of the cut on the other side. So I was able to figure out which end of each wire fit together.
Talk about a jigsaw puzzle.
with a magnifying glass.
That's
Like,
insane.
you know, like a loop. So I'd like hold the wire, like I was looking at a piece of diamond. This was given to me by a fan. He said, "Hey, I'm retired. This is at my warehouse in Connecticut." He goes, "It's yours. Go get it. I would love to see you use it." And I went out there with a trailer. I didn't go right away. Like a year later, I sent him a message. I was like, "Can I still get that bandsaw?" He's like, "Yeah." Because now I finally had a trailer and the means to get it.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yeah, go get it. I'd love to see you use it." And so I got it from a guy named George who lives in Florida. So thank you, George.
Thanks, George.
And here it goes. This is a fancy bandsaw. I mean, it's worth like $500 because nobody wants it. It's like, seems like, you know, compared to like a brand new modern bandsaws, they could be as much as $4,000 and $5,000.
Yeah.
But a bandsaw like this, they definitely perform better than like a more modern machine. And I think what happens is the manufacturing got to the point where like, why does it need to weigh 3,000 pounds? Can't it weigh 1,000 pounds? And then so all machines got lighter, probably easier for shipping, easier for manufacturing, easier for a lot of reasons. Like when you look at the Fairbanks power hammer we looked at versus like what you see like a trip hammer now. You know, it's like literally 30% of the amount of material being used now compared to like what's used on that Fairbanks hammer. And people are like, just focus it right here. It smells all that matters. But meanwhile, things like rickety and banging all over the place. It still works. It still does what it's supposed to, but it's just missing doesn't have like the spirit of like strong work.